It is early in the morning on April 15, 1912. The SS Californian has spent the past 2 hours racing through an ice field, and now she has arrived on the scene of a disaster. The RMS Titanic, the largest ship in the world, is sinking, and the Californian has arrived to witness her final moments. As the bridge begins flooding, the small lifeboats from the Titanic row to the Californian, while the Californian lowers her boats to rescue as many as they can, but it all may just be in vain. As the boats row towards the Californian, the first funnel collapses, and shortly after that, the second one does as well. Just as the first survivors climb on board the Californian, the Titanic's lights, which had been fading for over an hour, finally give out, plunging hundreds of people into complete darkness. The Californian's crew turn on her Morse lamp to illuminate the Titanic so they know where hundreds of people would soon be, when a loud symphony of noises would be heard. The crew and the survivors would watch in horror as the massive ship broke into two large pieces. The stern would float briefly, before it too began to sink rapidly. Within a few minutes, hundreds of people would be plunged into the freezing North Atlantic. Hundreds could be heard screaming for help, and dozens of people could be seen swimming towards the Californian. The Californian's lifeboats and those of the Titanic, once they had emptied themselves of their previous complement, would row towards the survivors still in the water. For around a half an hour, the boats would make 2 to 3 trips, picking up those in the water and helping them aboard the Californian. Though issues would arise, as the Californian was not built to hold as many people as it was holding. Soon, the lifeboats still filled with people would not be able to offload them, and the lifeboats would simply huddle alongside the Californian for a few hours before another ship, the RMS Carpathia, would arrive at around 4 a.m. Those that were still in the lifeboats would be loaded onto the Carpathia before around 600 people would be transferred to the Carpathia from the Californian. In the next few hours, another ship, the SS America, would arrive, taking on another 400 people. In total, 1,300 people out of the 2,200 people on board the Titanic would survive, with 900 people having drowned or froze to death during the sinking. Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm sure you've all heard the story of the Californian if you're watching this. A ship that was maybe 10 or so miles away from the Titanic when she was sinking, yet she never came. It's been well theorized by many that maybe if she had gone to the Titanic's rescue, that many, if not all of the people, aside from those trapped within the ship, would have survived, and that's what this video seeks to make happen through some alternation of events. We start on the evening of April 14th, 1912 at around 10 p.m. The Californian was sailing towards the city of Boston on a routine trip when it was noticed that the ship was surrounded by ice. In an odd choice, Captain Lord would decide to have his ship press on through the night, though at incredibly slow speeds. Because of this, Captain Lord would order the ship's wireless operator, Cyril Evans, to stay awake later in the night than he usually did in the event that the Californian did strike an iceberg. Evans would inform nearby ships of the situation that the Californian was currently in, receiving a reply only from the nearby RMS Titanic, telling him to shut up as their wireless operator, Jack Phillips, was busy working Cape Race. Evans would be annoyed but would comply, having orders from the captain to stay up later into the night. 2 hours and 15 minutes later, just as Cyril Evans was preparing to shut down for the night and head to bed, he would hear a message coming through his wireless set. CQD, 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 MGY, CQD, CQD, CQD. A distress call from none other than the Titanic. He would quickly scribble the message down before rushing to the bridge where Captain Lord was. He'd hand him the message saying that it was a distress call from the Titanic, MGY being the Titanic's call sign. Captain Lord would at first believe it was a joke. Before it became evident that Evans wasn't joking, he would order Evans to find the position of the Titanic and respond to the sinking ship. As Evans did that, Third Officer Charles Groves would inform the captain that a large liner appeared to be 10 or so miles to the south of the ship, as multiple decks of the ship were lit and the mast lights could be seen. Believing this ship to be the Titanic, as it was supposedly the closest ship to the Californian, Captain Lord would order the ship to turn towards the one in the horizon and ordered the engines to be put to full. As the Californian turned towards the ship on the horizon, Evans was busy contacting the Titanic. He'd send the following message. MWL to MGY, we hear you, what is going on? The Titanic would respond quickly. MGY to MWL, we have struck a berg. Position 41.46 north, 50.14 west, come at once. Evans would scribble this message down before reporting to the bridge once again. He'd hand the message to Captain Lord, which confirmed that the ship on the horizon was more than likely the Titanic. As such, he would order all the steam that the ship was making to be directed towards the engine. Heating was shut off, alongside hot water. Soon the Californian became much cooler, to the inconvenience of the crew. Crew that had been off duty would be woken up and ordered to prepare as many beds and blankets as possible, and once that was finished, they were to also prepare warm drinks and meals for the survivors they'd be picking up in the coming hours. The Californian would spend a lot of her time dodging the various icebergs en route to the Titanic, pushing the small ones aside, while narrowly avoiding the large ones that would sink her. Due to all the steam being directed to the engine, the Californian managed to push well past her design speed, reaching 17 knots when it had only been believed that she could go 13 knots at most. As she came closer to the sinking Titanic, she began firing rockets to assure the passengers and crew that help was indeed on the way, as people on board the sinking vessel and within the lifeboats could all see the light on the horizon, ever so slowly growing bigger and bigger. Messages between the Californian and the Titanic continued until the Californian had arrived on site at 2:10 in the morning, just as water began to flood the Titanic's bridge. The Californian would stop nearby the Titanic, with the lifeboats being readied and lowered by the crew, while the lifeboats from the Titanic slowly rowed towards their rescue. As the first boats from the Californian hit the water, the lifeboats from the Titanic would arrive alongside the small cargo ship that had come to their rescue. The 700 people within the boats would climb onto the Californian when suddenly the lights on board the Titanic, which had been slowly failing over the past hour, cut out, plunging those on board the Titanic into complete darkness. The Californian's crew would quickly turn on their Morse lamp to try and illuminate the Titanic, so they'd know where hundreds of people would soon be, when dozens of loud noises would be heard from deep within the Titanic. The Titanic then broke apart, with her stern slamming down into the water once again. It floated briefly, and people aboard the Californian believed that maybe it would stay afloat. But it would not, as the heavy machinery within the Titanic, or perhaps the still partially connected hull, pulled the stern under. Within minutes, hundreds of people had been plunged into the freezing North Atlantic Ocean, though they still had hope for a rescue. Those that could would swim towards the lifeboats that had huddled around the Californian, or the returning lifeboats that were coming to rescue survivors. Over the next 30 minutes, the lifeboats would search for survivors, while over 700 survivors remained on the Californian, tightly packed together, as the Californian was carrying over 650 more passengers than it was intended to. It was so crowded that the returning boats weren't able to let any more people on, aside from those that were suffering from hypothermia who'd swapped places with someone already on board. For the next hour, the lifeboats, containing around 500 people, would huddle around the Californian before another ship, the RMS Carpathia, arrived to take on around 700 passengers. A few hours after that, another ship, the SS America, would also arrive, taking on around 400 passengers from the Californian. The three ships would then make their ways towards New York City, arriving at different times on April 18, 1912. Captain Lord of the Californian and Captain Rostron of the Carpathia were welcomed in New York City as heroes, as both men had risked their own ships dashing through the night to rescue the survivors of the Titanic. After the Titanic inquiries were held in both the United States and the United Kingdom, the two captains would meet with Titanic survivors at the end of 1913, where they presented the two with silver cups and gold medals for their efforts during the night Titanic sank. They were also awarded with the Congressional Gold Medal, the Thanks of Congress, and the American Cross of Honor. Both men would be highly praised for their efforts on both sides of the Atlantic. The two hero ships would continue to serve their companies well in the following years, though both would meet their fates during World War I. On November 9, 1915, the Californian would be torpedoed and sunk by German U-boats in the Mediterranean Sea. The Carpathia would meet a similar fate, being torpedoed and sunk on July 17, 1918. Captain Lord would continue serving the Leyland Line into the 1920s, before retiring in 1927. He would die in January of 1962. Captain Rostron would serve in the Royal Navy during the First World War, being praised highly, though he only commanded passenger ships requisitioned for the war effort. In the 1920s, he'd become the Commodore of the Cunard Fleet, retiring in 1931. He would die November of 1940. Today, both men are still remembered as heroes, being represented in almost all Titanic media for their actions. Though some do wonder, what if Captain Lord had stopped his ship for the night? What if Evans had went to bed and never heard the messages for help? Well, we'll never know. You've made it to the end of the video. If you're still here, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, as I plan to make a few more videos like this. I might cover the Britannic managing to beach itself, or something more obscure, I'm not sure yet. Have a lovely day.